Hello, my name is Rachel, and I want to welcome you today to Mums at the Table. Joining me today are friends Shona.
Morning.
Hello. Melody.
Hi.
And Julie.
Hi,
Welcome,
Rachel.
ladies.
Hi.
How are you feeling today?
Good. Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit of
another day.
Yeah, another day, another exciting day.
Yeah.
Well, you know, today we're going to dig deep and have a little fun as well. We'll be talking with neuroscientist Dr. Sarah Mackay about amping up our brain power for healthy, happy lives. We're challenging the idea that women are naturally made to multitask. We'll be discussing the way that we face our fears and talking kids' birthday parties. So first, I want to dip our toe into the often troubled waters of kids' birthday parties. Alexis Olympia, Serena Williams' daughter, recently had her first birthday. But because of Serena's personal beliefs, their family didn't have any festivities, saying that their daughter is celebrated all the time by family and friends throughout the year. Julie, I know you have daughters. Did you, go all out for their parties, or did you guys not do much at all?
Well, we didn't go all out. They seem to go out all out a lot more now. But we would do something little each year. We would recognise the fact that, it was their birthday and they were with us for another year. But when they got to the more significant ones like 18th and 21st, I said to the girls, all right, you can have an 18th or you can have a 21st. You choose.
Oh, wow.
Because I wasn't going to do both.
Yeah.
So they got to choose. But other years we would maybe just have a couple of friends over. But always on the day we'd have a cake and, on the night. You get to choose what, we would always acknowledge it.
Yeah. I mean, some people go all out with like a wedding style birthday, so.
Yeah. I'm on the can. Oh,
guilty.
Uh-oh. I was just speaking generally. I wasn't pointing any fingers, but if the shoe fits, wear it, I guess.
Yeah, I've got it on.
Are you you do these all out, wedding style birthday parties?
I'm planning for the first 21st, which is happening in January already. I'm like, wow, do you want a party? And he's like, no, I'll just take money. And I'm like, oh, what? No party?
Wait, I guess they're imagining.
Is this every year?
Yeah, pretty
Every
much.
year.
Like when the boys were little, we did big parties every year, invited all the church family, friends.
So is the party for them or for you?
Both. And look, in some instances also, it was a great way to witness because some of the family members aren't Christians. So it was a good way to witness to them.
Now, when you say all out, do you mean like...
all out, baby. All out. All out.
So what would you do?
Cakes, tables and tables of food, balloons, gift bags, you name it.
I need to be adopted into your family.
I'm exhausted.
I'm sure there's someone else here that doesn't do parties at all, though.
Yeah, well, yeah. I'm of the camp, right, that, when it's Elliot's birthday, he needs to send me a card to thank me for birthday.
Wow.
You'll be waiting a long time.
No, but maybe I would just acknowledge, I wouldn't go like, oh, it's not a special day in that sense. But yeah, I don't really believe in going all out. I mean,
is it for money? Is it to save money, or is it just it's not that big of a deal?
Number one, I'm lazy. But number two, I just think it's something like what Serena says as well. You celebrate the child every day. Why do you need a special day to remind you to celebrate the child? Especially more
So do you feel that way about your birthday? If your husband did nothing at all, you'd be fine with it?
I'd kill him.
Well, you know what? Whether you throw a grand soiree or you do a little happy dance by yourself at home, we thank God for every day because, it's a blessing. And now we're going to find out what Gia and Olive are cooking up in the kitchen.
What are we making?
Weet-Bix slice.
Weet-Bix slice. So in Australia, because there are some people watching this that aren't in Australia, but in Australia, we in the 80s had a song on TV that would say, Weet-Bix kids or Aussie kids are Weet-Bix kids. And so there is not a child in Australia that doesn't love Weet-Bix, I'm sure. And I know there's mothers out there that are guilty of feeding their kids Weet-Bix for dinner, okay, like I did last night, which is true. Anyway, so we're making Weet-Bix slice. And we've not really used any Weet-Bix for our ingredients next few 7 or 8. We're going to actually do little lunchbox treats. Things that you can use for lunchbox for adults and things you can use for lunchbox for kids. Is that fun? So 4 Weet-Bix, and it's all done in the food processor. It's really simple. 1 cup of cashews, roasted cashews are better, and 1 cup of apricots, so dried apricots, semi-dried apricots, whatever you want to use. And that's all you need. You need a splash of water, but I'm just going to start blending. That's it. That's all it was. Now, these are good for kids' lunchboxes, for school. you have to put this in the fridge. So now that I'm going to put it in here, I've just lined an 8x8 baking dish. You can use any dish. You can use a loaf pan, anything you've got at home. As long as you make sure that you push it down firmly. So you want it to be even all the way through. Okay, nearly there. And we are going to put this in the freezer or the fridge. You can put it in the freezer for about half an hour to an hour, or in the fridge for 2 hours, and then you can take it out and you cut it up in little bars and put in some plastic bags, and that way your kids can have some treat. You can have it for lunch at work after your lunch, or your 3:30itis when you're at work and you're feeling a bit warm. Okay, done. That was easy. Look at that.
Can I have some?
Yes, as soon as it's ready. It's not ready, we're going to go put it in the fridge and we'll be back to show you what it looks like.
We got apricot slice.
Apricot slice, and Moses, Olive's little brother's taken over. He's going to help us, aren't you?
Yeah.
Should I cut it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll cut it. Yes, do you want some? Oh, he wants one so bad. Okay, there you go.
But it's a half one.
Yeah, you can't have that whole thing. That's too much. Now you're starting to sound like your sister. Okay, so you just cut them, but this really cuts well. And you can cut it in little squares or bigger squares as a treat. And what, can you believe there was only 3 ingredients in that? 3 ingredients. Some people would say 4 because I put a splash of water in it. But it's just Weet-Bix, cashew nuts, and apricots. I can't believe it. That's awesome. Nice, hey? Cheers.
In the October Mums at the Table magazine, we meet parents Adrian and Jane as they face the reality that their son Fraser has been labeled failure to thrive. It's a nail-biting article that will take you through all of the emotions of a parent facing the fear of the possible death of their newborn. Melody, I just want to know, what was going through your mind as you were reading this article?
I think the main thing that really struck me was how they actually ended up relying more on God, because usually in situations like this, right, you're raging towards God, going, "Where are you, God? Why are you doing this to me?" But instead, they actually end up getting stronger faith and experiencing this more reliance on God.
Yeah.
Did you find it was this instant thing, though? As I was reading the article, I kind of felt like sometimes I think in some Christian literature, it makes it sound like people go immediately from this point of fear to faith, as though it was this,
Yeah,
you know,
it's a
snap of the
process.
finger.
That's what I've found. It's always been a process. And I think sometimes we can mix up fear with anxiety, and sometimes we can be feeling anxious. And I know in times of life when I felt really fearful, I felt God's presence really closely as well. So I think we can trust in God at the same time as feeling fear. And the fear may be there, but I've prayed for peace. And I've had peace sitting there next to my fear.
And I think it's okay
Yeah.
to be fearful. I think that sometimes we get hung up on the fact that fear is a bad emotion. It's not. For me, when I've felt fear, I've found that was the driving force to make me find God, to question why God's putting me through these things, why, what was the outcome. And when you look back, you actually see that God was carrying you through those situations and guiding you and looking after you. Without going through that fear, you would never have had that peace of mind.
Isn't that one advantage of being older? I say to my girls sometimes, you know, when they don't know what God wants them to do, they're feeling fearful about their future. I said, when you get through, you can look back and you can see what God's done. I love in the article how she talks about God promises our daily bread. He doesn't promise our yearly bread. And that's what I find when I'm going through something really tough and scary, is that I trust God just for that day. Just get me through that day.
Or just for that minute, if that's all you can do. Yeah.
And get me through that week. And then I can look back and I say, yep, God was there that week.
So go ahead.
I was just thinking about one of the really striking memories I have of this fear and faith. It's actually about my dad. He passed away when I was 18, so it was like 20 years ago now. And he had cancer, and he was going through a lot of pain. He actually decided that he didn't want to go through chemotherapy. But one of the best images I have of him is he's at that point of time he was really emaciated. He was really, really, really sick, and you knew he was in pain. But I'll come into the hospital room and he'll sit there in bed. He'll be sitting up and he'll be looking at a poster on the wall, and it's actually of God, and he would just be smiling, and it was just looking at that and knowing just the amount of, there's that fear that there's death coming, and well, it's certain that death is coming, but yet he had that faith and that joy and that peace, and just knowing that there was God there with him.
I think for me, a lot of fear is the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
And that's, you think you've got your life sorted, you think you know what's going to happen, and so suddenly life throws something unexpected, and it happens to everybody, and then just trusting God to be okay, not knowing what you think is going to happen, but you know that God's got you back.
What's that Bible text in, I think it's Philippians, about faith is not seen, or we stand by faith. We have God and he's there. We don't necessarily have to see him.
Yeah.
And I think that's what fear does for us. We can't see God per se, but through feelings like fear and anxiety and depression and all these other things, we can see God. We can see his work.
There was one quote that really stood out to me, and I think it kind of, encapsulates everything we're saying, but it's just, yes, we resist fear, but the way we fight it is to learn from it, and by first facing it so that it loses its paralyzing effect. So I think, as you were saying, your girls are scared of that unknown, and it's like we fear because we don't know what's ahead of us. So it's like when you face it head on and you actually ask yourself, I think sometimes we have to ask ourselves, like, what is it that I'm actually scared of? Like, what is the worst thing that could happen in the scenario? And in that scenario with your father, it was like, I guess he knew that death was pending, but when he faced that reality, it was like, as we start facing it, I guess it starts losing that paralyzing effect,
Yeah, we don't need to have fear control our lives. I think it's there, and we deal with it, and we trust God, but it doesn't have to control everything we do.
Yeah, and it is that constant reminder, like it is that reminder that we continue to go back to him and to, deal with that fear that we're facing. Well, I guess at one point or another, we all will face fear. Some people cling to their faith. And what is it that you do when you're feeling afraid? We'd love to hear about it on our social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube, Mums at the Table. And now to change gears a bit, there's the all-popular topic of fat. Is there such a thing as good fat?
Hi, and we are here with Trish today. Hello, Trish.
Hi, Tia.
Trish is here. We're going to talk about some nutritional facts, and we are here to talk about fats today. And I know everyone here is going to be interested in this one because I know I am. And we've always heard butter is back. Butter is back. Is butter back?
Is butter back? Well, lots of people will try and tell you that butter is back, but what I'm here to talk about today is some of the research behind that and really what types of fats we should be focusing on for a healthy diet. So we have seen lots of claims that butter is back, and that came from some research a couple of years ago where some researchers looked at fats and saturated fats in the diet and concluded that if you're reducing the amount of saturated fat in your diet, that your cholesterol level won't go down and your heart disease risk won't go down, which, that's going against advice that we've heard from heart foundations for a long, long time. So it got a lot of attention.
Yes.
But I'm here to say butter is not back.
Okay, because I was going to say, what's the latest?
Yeah, butter is definitely not back.
Okay.
Butter's high in saturated fats, as are meats and high-fat dairy foods. And we do know that saturated fats still do raise cholesterol and our heart disease risk, and really should be limited in our diet. And some more research has actually happened since some of these claims about butter came out. And, the real world experts in this area have gone back and looked at the studies, and they have found that it really depends on what you replace the saturated fat with. So if you replace saturated fats with highly refined processed foods, refined crackers, white bread, white rice, sugary drinks, all those sorts of highly processed foods, then your cholesterol level and heart disease risk doesn't go down.
Okay.
So you really, you're replacing one bad with something
For
else.
another bad.
Yeah, that's not really that great. But what they showed is if you do replace the saturated fat with foods with healthy fats, so the polyunsaturated and the monounsaturated fats, and even whole grains, so whole grain wheats, breads, breakfast cereals, those sorts of things, your cholesterol level and heart disease risk does come down.
Does go down.
Absolutely.
So what is the good fat?
the main type of fats that we should be cooking with are things like extra virgin olive oil. They are the best types of fats for cooking. But other healthy fats include polyunsaturated or monounsaturated margarine.
Okay,
Yeah.
so margarines.
They are a really good choice. Or even your everyday polyunsaturated or monounsaturated oils like canola, for example. But other really great sources of fats are things like avocados, which can replace butter.
That's what I like.
Yeah.
Because for me, all this monounsaturated and all that just doesn't make sense sometimes.
No.
See, for me, I just like keep it simple
Yeah,
for me. So I just think you eat whole food fats.
Absolutely. And, avocado is great on bread as an alternative to butter.
Yes.
And nuts as well, or even nut spreads. They are all really good
Peanut
fat
butter.
choices.
I see you've got some there.
Coconut oil, which we could talk about in a whole segment in and of itself, that's high in saturated fats and something that, we do need to limit.
Yes, so not too much of the coconut oil. So,
No.
yes, because people say, should we have more of this, more of that? So just really sticking to the whole food, really, and
the plant sources of fats, whether that be the whole plant sources like your nuts and your avocados, or your more liquid ones, so
from your
extra virgin olive
and
oil for cooking, or even for sandwiches. If you want a margarine, they're still an excellent choice.
Well, I know that on our website, thetabletv.com, you will actually see lots of our recipes that we have lots of these good fats that we're using.
Wonderful.
We're making bars and all sorts of sauces. But thank you. Sanitarium has some recipes too, don't they?
Yes, check out sanitarium.com.au for some more information on healthy eating and a huge selection of plant-based recipes.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Neuroscientist and author Dr. Sarah Mackay translates research into actionable ideas for people like you and me so we can live happier, healthier lives. Sarah, we're very excited to have you with us today.
Oh, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I think that brain, it's, as women, we often think about our bodies and how fit we are, but we don't necessarily go beneath the surface and start thinking about the health of our brains.
Yeah, I get that, and that's kind of why I wrote the book. And I think there's a bit of a misconception out there that our brains are separate from the rest of the body and the world around us, and really everything that we should be doing to take care of our brains is the same as what we're doing to take care of our bodies.
So that's one myth that's already been busted.
Yep.
So
Check that one off.
What are some ways that we as women can be, taking care of our brains and keeping them happier and healthier? I love the happier part as well.
Yeah, look, I like to think of brain health and to try and conceptualise it, because it's a really complex topic. I talk about taking care of yourself from the bottom up, so taking care of your biology, what food are you eating, are you exercising, are you getting enough sleep? That's a really important one. Taking care of your brain from the outside in, so what's happening in the outside world, your environment, are there stressful events happening out there that perhaps you need to be buffering? How well connected are you socially with other people, and are you respecting the light-dark cycle, getting enough sleep at night when you should be? And then taking care of our brain from the bottom down. So thinking about our thoughts and our feelings and our mindset, and it's just really kind of approaching our brain health from each of those bottom-up, outside in and top-down ways.
In some ways, we might think that we just get the brain that we get. But as you're talking, and I know you've done research on neuroplasticity, it seems as though we can actually change what's happening with our brain. Can you just break that down for us?
Yeah, well, our brains evolved to be able to change and react and respond to all of the experiences we have. Especially when we're children, our brains are incredibly what we call plastic or malleable, or changed by the experiences around us. Now, the degree of plasticity kind of drops off a little bit as we get older. That just means it's harder for it to change, but it still always changes by the in response to the experiences we have in the world around us. So that's why it's quite nice to always try and ensure that the experiences that we have are positive, or we can put a positive spin on them, that we surround ourselves with good people, and that all goes to sort of moulding our brains.
I feel like when I became a mum for the first time, something changed in my brain. I got more emotional. I'd cry more at movies. I'd cry at really silly things that I would never cry at before. Is that real?
Yeah, me too. Really? And absolutely. There's this really interesting research that was published a couple of years ago looking at how the structure of women's brains changed during pregnancy. Wow. So brain scans were done before and after their first pregnancy, and a specific region of their brain shrunk. Now that sounds a little bit like, oh gosh, that's degenerating, but our brains often when they get a bit thinner, perhaps they're streamlining and they're getting better at particular functions. And the part of the brain that's streamlining streamlined in pregnant women is the part of the brain involved in empathy and social cognition and theory of mind. So being able to recognise the thoughts and feelings of other people. And in the case of a mum, that's anticipating her baby's wants and needs.
So there is such a thing as baby brain.
Well, your brain changes during pregnancy, but we don't have a lot of strong evidence that, certainly when women are brought into the lab and various cognitive tests are done on them, that they become, we don't become more forgetful. We don't necessarily become foggier during pregnancy. We think we do, but if we're getting enough sleep, our test scores don't match up. And look, and I come from New Zealand, and we've got a Prime Minister over there who's doing quite well, thanks very much, despite pregnancy.
It's actually, you've mentioned in New Zealand, one of the studies that you did, that you mentioned in your book was about this environment that children in high stress situation grew up in.
Yeah. So I talk a lot about, I grew up in Christchurch in New Zealand, and it was kind of started about eight years ago now. A series of huge earthquakes absolutely devastated the city. And what people started noticing about 5 or 6 years after those earthquakes was children starting primary school who had been very, very young, who'd been babies or toddlers during the earthquakes, so had gone through incredibly stressful time in their lives, were suffering a lot of learning problems. They were highly anxious. They were very stressed. Now, older children seem to cope a little bit better, but certainly those very, very young children didn't seem to be coping very well. And it wasn't, because their mothers couldn't cope with the earthquakes. It just was an incredibly stressful time for everyone. And I think it just shows how important and how precious early childhood is, and what we can do. The best thing that we can do, and what we know from the research, is to put good, strong grey matter infrastructure in around children. And that is strong social networks, good family support, good education, good social networks around those kids to help them through.
Often when women are pregnant, we go, don't upset her, make her stay calm. And then when we're pregnant, we worry that we're going to damage the baby because we're a little bit stressed.
Yeah. I think,
reality?
if we're talking about excessive stress that perhaps comes from a natural disaster or some kind of trauma, that's no good. But there is some research, and I write about that in the book, that normal levels of maternal angst, the kind of worrying that you do when you're pregnant, is not going to harm the baby. Yeah, it's just best to avoid that excessive stress. And if women are in, a trauma environment or perhaps in a natural disaster, we need to again provide those social structures around them.
I want to come back to that sleep because I love my sleep. Tell me about sleep in your book.
Oh, look, I think it's one of the absolutely underestimated best things that we can do for our brains. I think getting a good night's sleep every night.
I hope my husband's watching this.
We all know what happens when we don't get a good night's sleep, and we spend a lot of our days in this modern world under-consuming natural light during the day, over-consuming artificial light at night, and not respecting the fact that, we live on a planet that has a light-dark cycle. And my other tip, and I think you might like this one, is trying to find time for an afternoon nap. If you get a bit sleepy in the afternoon, a 20-minute afternoon nap, it improves your memory and makes you a much nicer mum.
I wonder if our employer would allow that.
I think that they do have nap pods in different parts of the day.
I think they're inspired,
Well, it's interesting because I did watch your TED Talk about naps, and you were able to, do your entire TED Talk more or less about the power of the nap. And I was thinking to myself as a mom, like, where could I fit that time in? But you were saying that even our memories, or even the way that you did a study, or you talked about a study where people were reacting differently to emotions. Like their emotions were dialed down when they had a little bit of sleep.
Yeah, for sure. And certainly I talk about that, it kind of smooths off those rough emotional edges that develop during the day. And certainly for me as a mum, when my boys were little and they were at home with me every day before they started school, it made me a lot nicer to be around in the afternoon if I fitted in a 20-minute nap, and you can do that. And I also, now that they're a little bit older, I still try and get to bed around the same time they do. I really do like my sleep. I get up really early in the mornings, but I'm often tucked up in bed by 8:30 or 9 with a good book.
Talking about emotions, what about teenagers? They're often labelled as being emotional and unpredictable.
Oh, I know. They get a bad rap, don't they, teenagers?
So tell us about their brain.
Well, look, we understand, and this is reasonably new research that's kind of come out in the last decade or so, that our brains don't just develop through childhood. They continue developing all the way through the teenage years, throughout adolescence, and really are still developing in our early and mid-20s. And so we understand, if we were to look at teenage girls, how they develop physically, they're a year or two ahead of boys, boys kind of, develop a year or two later, and their brains are the same. The main part of the brain we see developing in teenagers is their prefrontal cortex, this part right at the front of the brain that's involved in judgment and planning and decision-making, emotional regulation, and also social cognition, so what's happening in the world around us with other people. Now, we tend to be very negative and deride those changes. All they care about is their friends, or they're highly emotional. But the brain is actually going through a process of learning at that point in time. When we go through these phases of development, these critical periods of development, it's when we're most receptive to learn. So that's when we should be teaching young people about emotional regulation. That's when we should be teaching them about understanding the thoughts and feelings of other people.
I guess the scary thing is if they're so plastic, they can also take on the negative impacts as well at that time.
Absolutely, and that's why, once again, and I think the most important thing we can do at any stage of life, whether it be, little 9-month-old babies or 19-year-olds, or, once we're, 29, 39, 99, is understand the importance of social cohesion and social bonds, the outside world coming in.
Yeah.
That's one of the greatest buffers and greatest supports we can put into place.
Yeah.
As moms, we often think about, we have to think about our kids, about napping, so many things, and we often say that women are great multitaskers. Is this a myth, or is this...
Absolute myth. There's no,
come on.
No. There's no, I like to think about, if we talk about multitasking, we have to understand what it's doing. It's about attention, and I like to think of attention as being like a flashlight. You've got one beam of light, you can twist it, you can make it broad, you can make it narrow, you can't split the beam. And so if you're trying to multitask, what you're doing is you're switching your attention from task
So you're
to
actually
task.
multi-switching.
You're task switching. You can't split it, you can only go from one to the other, and what happens is your performance on both drops. And it's incredibly stressful. Our brains aren't designed. Our brains are designed for mindful unitasking, not for multitasking. It doesn't matter whether you're male, female.
So I don't
But
feel that bad now.
in our work, we often have to multitask, or as mums, we often do this, start cooking that, put the washing on the line.
Yeah, and we're not very good at any of it when we try and do it, are we?
Shona obviously is.
If we mindfully focus on one task at a time, we can put all of our attention on it, we can perform
But if
to
only our kids would
best.
allow us to do that.
Well, I know, I suppose it's finding those ways.
We've talked a lot about, the information that you have here in this book. We're giving away 5 copies of The Women's Brain by Dr. Sarah Mackay. Email us at hello@mumsathetable.com and include the Women's Brain book giveaway in your email. That's hello@mumsathetable.com. The first 5 people to email us will get a copy. Now, if you'd like to continue the conversation, you can join us online on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or on our website, mumsathetable.com. Dr. Sarah, I'd like to thank you for being here with us today. We really enjoyed talking with you and having this discussion about our brains and how, we can even change certain things about them.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, ladies, it was always a pleasure to have you with us.
I've got to go for my nap. Hurry up.
20 minutes now. Well, until next time, take care and God bless.